Linda Reynolds and her son Tommy lived in a quiet Ohio neighborhood. Behind closed doors, a terrifying secret festered. Linda allowed their fierce dog Rex to maul Tommy like a chew toy. What drove a mother to let her child suffer such horror, and how did this nightmare stay hidden for so long? In a quiet neighborhood in Ohio, life seemed peaceful on the surface. The small streets were lined with modest houses, children played outside, and neighbors exchanged polite greetings. Some speculated that she suffered from mental health issues, while others wondered if she believed this was some harsh form of discipline. Medical staff immediately suspected abuse, as the wounds were inconsistent with a typical dog bite. The severity of the injuries indicated that the attacks were not accidental or isolated incidents, but part of an ongoing pattern of harm. When the hospital reported the case to Child Protective Services, an investigation was launched, and the true horrors of the Reynolds household began to surface. The house was disorderly and showed signs of neglect: dirty floors, spoiled food in the kitchen, and scattered dog toys mixed with children's belongings. Others admitted they had seen Tommy with bruises or scratches, but never suspected abuse because Linda always covered for him with excuses. School officials added their concerns, reporting that Tommy had missed many days of class, often appearing withdrawn and fearful when present. The growing evidence painted a picture of a child living in a constant state of danger and fear. Rex, the dog, was locked inside a cramped room, growling and snapping at anyone who came close. Despite this threatening presence, Linda appeared surprisingly calm, even indifferent. When confronted about Tommy's injuries, she insisted that the dog was not dangerous and claimed the boy had provoked Rex, but her explanations did not add up. The chilling fact was that Linda did not intervene to protect her son, but instead seemed to use the dog's aggression as a weapon. The house was cluttered and unkempt, with evidence of Rex's aggressive behavior visible throughout. Linda had used severe punishment to control the dog, including isolation and intimidation, which made Rex more violent. This training created a dangerous animal that was unpredictable and capable of serious harm. More shockingly, it became clear that Linda used Rex as a tool to punish Tommy. She did not try to stop the attacks, but rather allowed the dog to continue biting and clawing at her son, as if she believed it was a form of discipline. Tommy's fearful eyes told a story of pain and suffering that words could not express. The community, once oblivious, now faced a grim reality. Behind the quiet Ohio street was a nightmare unfolding, where a mother allowed her own son to be used as a plaything for a violent dog. The investigation was just beginning, and the dark secrets hidden inside this home were far from fully revealed. This terrifying neglect went unnoticed until one day when Tommy's injuries became too severe to hide. The authorities were alarmed not only by the boy's physical injuries, but also by the signs of long-term neglect. Medical professionals described the bite marks as unusually deep and consistent with multiple attacks over time, rather than a single incident. This raised urgent questions about how a child could endure such trauma without anyone stepping in sooner. He was often seen with bruises on his arms and legs, but whenever neighbors asked about his injuries, Linda would offer vague explanations: he fell down, or it's just a scrape from playing. No one pressed further, believing her words without suspicion. However, school officials began to notice that Tommy was often absent or arrived looking tired and withdrawn. When he did attend, his clothes were sometimes torn, and his skin bore marks that seemed too severe for everyday childhood accidents. Among these homes was one that stood out not because of its appearance, but because of the unsettling aura that surrounded it. Linda kept Rex, a large and muscular dog with a fierce reputation, locked inside the house. The dog's growls and barks were a common sound that drifted into the neighborhood, intimidating visitors and keeping people at a distance. But the most disturbing aspect was what happened inside the walls of the Reynolds home. Linda allowed Rex to attack Tommy repeatedly, treating her own son like an object for the dog to tear apart. She watched as Rex bit and mauled Tommy's arms and legs, ignoring the boy's screams and cries for help. This was the home of Linda Reynolds, a woman in her early 30s who lived there with her young son Tommy and a large, powerful dog named Rex. Two outsiders. Linda appeared to be a caring mother, always attentive to her son's needs. But beneath this carefully crafted image was a horrifying reality few could have imagined. Tommy, an 8-year-old boy with a shy demeanor, rarely played with the other kids in the neighborhood. Behind closed doors, the truth was far more sinister. The reasons behind Linda's twisted behavior remained unclear to most. Tommy was rushed to the hospital after a particularly brutal attack left deep bite wounds on his arms and legs. As investigators stepped into the home, they found signs of neglect and a dangerous environment where a frightened child lived under constant threat. After Tommy was admitted to the hospital with severe bite wounds, Child Protective Services quickly got involved, sparking a thorough investigation into the Reynolds household. Social workers visited the home to assess the living conditions and speak with Linda Reynolds, but the scene they found was troubling. Further questioning revealed more disturbing details. Neighbors recalled hearing frequent barking and yelps from the house. Most dismissed it as typical dog behavior or noise from children playing. The investigation uncovered that Rex's aggressive behavior was not natural, but the result of harsh and deliberate training methods. Linda had used severe punishment to control the dog, including isolation and intimidation, which made Rex more violent. This training created a dangerous animal that was unpredictable and capable of serious harm. More shockingly, it became clear that Linda used Rex as a tool to punish Tommy. She did not try to stop the attacks, but rather allowed the dog to continue biting and clawing at her son, as if she believed it was a form of discipline. Experts brought in by Child Services described the situation as one of extreme child endangerment. Tommy's mental and emotional health were at serious risk, along with his physical well-being. The boy's fragile state demanded immediate action. This intense training turned Rex into a dangerous animal, quick to attack on command or when provoked. Some injuries had begun to heal only to be reopened by fresh attacks. The boy's fragile body bore the scars of constant pain, but even more damaging was the emotional toll. Psychologists who met with Tommy described him as withdrawn and fearful, displaying signs of trauma that would take years to heal. The dog was removed from the home and placed in a secure facility designed to rehabilitate dangerous animals. It raised uncomfortable questions about the responsibilities of neighbors, schools, and authorities to recognize and act on signs of abuse. The story of a mother allowing her son to be mauled by a dog shook the quiet Ohio neighborhood to its core. But what emerged next was even more disturbing. Linda Reynolds had a troubling history that extended beyond her own home. Authorities discovered that Linda had worked as a babysitter and caregiver for other families in the area, raising serious concerns about whether her abusive behavior was isolated or part of a larger pattern. Tommy's story was no longer just about a boy and a dog. It was about a community grappling with the failure to protect one of its most vulnerable members and the need for vigilance to prevent such horrors from happening again. Specialists began working to retrain Rex, though the extent of his aggression made his recovery difficult. Rex was a living symbol of the abuse Tommy had endured, and the community struggled to reconcile the image of a family pet with the nightmare it had become. His trust in adults, especially his own mother, had been shattered. What made the situation truly horrifying was that Linda had weaponized this aggression, using Rex as a tool to punish her son. Through interviews with acquaintances and past neighbors, it was revealed that Linda believed harsh punishment was necessary to toughen up Tommy. She thought that allowing Rex to attack would discipline the boy, making him stronger and more obedient. This cruel rationale shocked everyone involved in the case, as it showed a deep misunderstanding of child welfare and a dangerous level of neglect and abuse disguised as parenting. The dog's bites and scratches were not random. They were orchestrated and encouraged by the mother, who saw this as a twisted form of discipline. Several neighbors admitted they had seen signs of trouble, but chose not to report it, believing it was not their place, or hoping Linda would get help on her own. This silence allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. The case sparked outrage among local authorities and community members, many of whom felt guilty for not intervening sooner. Social workers sought to remove him from the home as quickly as possible. Linda's neglect extended beyond physical abuse. Food was scarce and often unhealthy. The home was poorly maintained, and Tommy was left alone for long stretches without supervision. The combination of physical violence from the dog and emotional abandonment created a toxic environment that few children could survive unscathed. She claimed that she loved Tommy and was only trying to protect him in her own way. Rex was not simply a large dog with a bad temperament. He had been deliberately trained to be aggressive. Neighbors recalled hearing harsh commands and the dog's unsettling growls. But no one knew just how severe Linda's training methods were. It became clear that Rex's violence was no accident, but the product of cruel conditioning meant to enforce control both over the dog and, disturbingly, over Tommy. But her actions told a different story. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Linda's neglect and cruel use of Rex as a weapon had placed Tommy in grave danger, setting off a chain of events that would soon unravel a disturbing family secret. The child's fight for safety and justice was only just beginning, but they also wanted to understand how long this abuse had been going on, and whether anyone else in the community had noticed. During interviews, a disturbing pattern emerged. Meanwhile, Linda remained defiant, refusing to accept responsibility for the harm done to her son. As investigators delved deeper into the Reynolds family's troubled history, shocking revelations began to emerge about the true nature of Rex and the role he played in Tommy's suffering. The police and animal control officers uncovered evidence of harsh treatment toward Rex, including the use of forceful discipline techniques and confinement to a small, isolated area of the house for long periods. Medical records confirmed that Tommy's wounds were consistent with repeated dog attacks over many months, if not longer. A particularly disturbing discovery came when investigators learned about Linda's mindset. The community was stunned as more details surfaced. It was not just the attacks by Rex that were harmful. Tommy lived in a household where fear was constant. Meanwhile, Rex's future was uncertain. Animal control officers, recognizing the dog's aggressive behavior, were forced to take steps to ensure the safety of others. As the investigation unfolded, the case became a grim example of how unchecked cruelty can hide behind closed doors. As the investigation into the Reynolds household deepened, the community's outrage grew stronger. The story of a mother allowing her son to be mauled by a dog shook the quiet Ohio neighborhood to its core. But what emerged next was even more disturbing. Linda Reynolds had a troubling history that extended beyond her own home. Several parents recalled their children coming home with unexplained bruises or scratches. Some mentioned that their kids seemed unusually fearful or reluctant to be left alone with her. Despite a few informal complaints, no official investigations had been launched before. The lack of formal reports meant that Linda had avoided scrutiny and continued to be trusted by families seeking childcare. This failure highlighted gaps in the system and raised questions about how abuse can go unnoticed for so long. They advocated for stricter regulations on dog training methods and better monitoring of animals living in homes with children. Local schools and social services increased their training for staff to better identify signs of abuse. Community organizations launched awareness campaigns to encourage reporting and provide resources for families in crisis. The courtroom was packed as prosecutors laid out the harrowing details of abuse and neglect, painting a vivid picture of the cruelty Tommy endured at home. Evidence included medical records documenting the severity and repeated nature of the dog attacks, testimony from social workers and psychologists, and accounts from neighbors who had grown concerned over time. The judge condemned her actions as unforgivable and emphasized the need to protect children from such abuse. Slowly, the boy began to open up, discovering small joys and moments of happiness he had never known. Recognizing the dog's aggressive training, they placed him in a specialized rehabilitation program designed to assess whether he could be safely rehomed. Rex's case sparked debates about the responsibility owners have for their pets and the impact of abuse on animals themselves. Some community members hoped Rex could eventually live peacefully away from violence, while others feared the risk he posed. His physical wounds healed, but the emotional recovery would take time. Despite the pain of his past, Tommy's story became one of resilience and hope, inspiring those who followed the case to believe in the possibility of healing after trauma. For many, the sentence brought a sense of closure, but the road ahead for Tommy was far from easy. Removed from the dangerous environment of his home, Tommy entered foster care with a family trained to care for children who had experienced trauma. It prompted local agencies to reevaluate how signs of abuse are reported and handled, leading to improved training for teachers, social workers, and neighbors. Awareness campaigns encouraged residents to speak up if they suspected a child was in danger, aiming to prevent tragedies like Tommy's from happening again. The transition was difficult. He struggled with fear, trust issues, and the long-lasting effects of neglect and violence. Each piece of information added weight to the case, leaving little doubt about Linda's culpability. The Reynolds case became a catalyst for reform, showing how a single tragedy could lead to greater protection for children and animals alike. Rex's story became intertwined with Tommy's, symbolizing the damage that can be done when cruelty is allowed to fester unchecked. The story of Tommy and Rex was a painful lesson, stark warning about the dangers hidden behind closed doors and a call to action to protect the most vulnerable among us. It highlighted the critical need for resources and intervention programs that can break cycles of neglect and violence before they destroy lives. These reports, which had been scattered and largely unconfirmed, gained new significance in light of the recent discoveries. They argued that the injuries were accidental and that Linda had acted out of ignorance rather than malice. However, this defense failed to convince the jury, especially given the history of neglect and the disturbing testimony from experts about Linda's use of Rex as a weapon. The prosecution emphasized the lasting harm done to Tommy, not only the physical wounds, but the psychological scars that could take years to heal. The jury's verdict was unanimous. Linda Reynolds was found guilty on multiple counts of child endangerment and cruelty. He was placed in foster care with a loving family who specialized in caring for children with trauma. Experts weighed in on the dangers of using animals as instruments of punishment and the importance of recognizing warning signs. The story also brought focus to the responsibility of communities to watch out for one another and report suspected abuse. Many local residents expressed regret for not speaking up sooner, but the case served as a powerful reminder that vigilance can save lives. The transition was difficult for Tommy, who struggled to adjust to a new environment after years of neglect and fear. Psychologists worked closely with him to help rebuild his trust and begin healing the emotional wounds inflicted by years of abuse. His physical injuries slowly improved, but the emotional scars remained a significant challenge. It appeared that Linda's cruel tendencies were not limited to Tommy, but might have affected other vulnerable children as well. Authorities discovered that Linda had worked as a babysitter and caregiver for other families in the area, raising serious concerns about whether her abusive behavior was isolated or part of a larger pattern. Interviews with families who had previously entrusted their children to Linda revealed unsettling accounts. Local authorities, realizing the gravity of the situation, began piecing together a timeline that traced Linda's behavior over several years. Meanwhile, Child Protective Services focused on ensuring Tommy's safety and recovery. The case attracted media attention, drawing national headlines and sparking conversations about child abuse and animal cruelty. Animal welfare groups joined the conversation, emphasizing the need to rehabilitate dogs like Rex, who had been trained to be aggressive. Despite the horrors uncovered, the investigation brought about some positive changes. As the dust settled, the community remained haunted by what had happened, but committed to ensuring that no child would suffer in silence again. The trial of Linda Reynolds drew intense public attention, becoming a focal point for a community grappling with shock and disbelief. Linda's defense team struggled to counter the overwhelming evidence. Following the conviction, Linda was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Therapists worked closely with Tommy, helping him rebuild a sense of safety and normalcy. Meanwhile, Rex's fate was carefully managed by animal welfare specialists. The case of Linda Reynolds and her son left a lasting impact on the Ohio community. The story also sparked conversations about mental health and the importance of supporting struggling parents before situations escalate to abuse. It highlighted the critical need for resources and intervention programs that can break cycles of neglect and violence before they destroy lives. Though the dark chapter of Tommy's childhood had ended, the lessons it taught remained. It was a stark reminder of how easily suffering can be hidden behind the doors of an ordinary home, and how vital it is for communities to stay alert, compassionate, and ready to act. Tommy's survival was a testament to strength and the power of intervention, shining a light in the darkest of places and offering hope for a safer future for all children.